The 2024 NFL season schedule is out. Who's got the toughest schedules? Who's got the easiest paths to the playoffs? And who's got the best odds to win the next Super Bowl? All that and more coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. We appreciate our everydayers, and we always appreciate it when you hit subscribe. So please, helps us out a lot. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is sponsored by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Terms apply. All right, Matt, we've got London games, we've got Germany, Brazil, we've got primetime games, we've got Christmas games. So let's get into this schedule. Who got hosed by the schedule makers? We talked a little bit about some of these things with certain networks that now have some games, and the whole season kicks off on September 5th. Between the Baltimore Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs, AFC championship game rematch. We've got an NFC championship game rematch late in the season, week 17, that could have some playoff implications. So a lot of good ones here. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start with just some of your favorite games, the best games, some of the games that just jump out to you on the schedule?
Can I start with the Steelers just to get it out of the way, if you don't mind?
I guess we can talk about the Steelers.
Okay.
And look, I'm going to throw, I know there's a lot of Steelers fans that listen to this podcast, throw you all a bone here. They got hosed a little bit. Maybe the schedule in the entire league.
So we knew who's playing who, before last night. And I'm a big believer when you talk about strength of schedule. I really don't care what teams did last year. For example, the Steelers are playing the Jets this year. Well, strength of schedule from last year for the Jets does not apply to who you're likely to see this year. So the best way to do strength of schedule, to me, I think Warren Sharp created this, or certainly has taken it to the next level, is see the win totals of your opponents in Vegas lines. If you're, and the Steelers had the hardest schedule in the league in terms of who they're set to play. So you knew it wasn't going to be easy. And I'm not complaining. I just think it's a little bit crazy. So the first 10 weeks, it's challenging for the Steelers, but it's not insane. The last 8 weeks, BP, are bonkers. They play every one of their division games in the last 8 weeks. 6 of their last 8 games are against the hardest division in the league. There's going to be weather in Cleveland and Pittsburgh and Cincinnati and Baltimore. And then their other 2 games are at Philadelphia. And then on a short week, the Chiefs and Taylor Swift come here on Christmas, so it's like that 8 games against the entire division at Philly, short week against the Chiefs, who also have a short week, is just bonkers to me. And they play 10, or they also play 3 games in that stretch, Ravens, Eagles, Chiefs in 10 days. Like, wow. I mean, you better go 9-1 to start the season.
There are some other teams with tough schedules, but really, no matter how, if you just look at it, use the eyeball test, knowing football, knowing who their opponents are, you look at it and say, that's a rough schedule. When you look at strength of schedule, they're 32 out of 32 in how easy the schedule is for that team this year. And here's another way to look at it, Matt. And this is from, I want to get this right. This is from Mr. Kasib on, and I don't know where he gets the data from. I think it's from sports books and other places. And he compiled different sports books and, using win totals and this is again, using the Vegas lines as strength of schedule. And he's got it broken down here between percentage likelihood of winning the division, percentage likelihood of winning the conference, winning the Super Bowl, and then versus your average opponent on a neutral field, your plus minus for the season on what you would be on average, either favored or the underdog points wise against your opponent here.
Taking a step further here. I like it.
Yeah, right. And then what your expected win total would be throughout this. So the Steelers' expected win total based on all of the preseason odds, and obviously, and we know a lot of this is going to change, but this is just the perceived power of these teams. 8.5 wins, 8.6 wins is where the Steelers are projected, which would be last actually in their division, and a 10% chance to win the division. Well, you look at the AFC South and you look at the Buccaneers and the Saints, who have a lower projected win total of 7.9 and 7.6 respectively, but they have over twice as much for the Buccaneers. Even though they have a 1 win less projected on their schedule, they have a 23% chance of winning their division in the AFC South due to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with 7.9 wins, and the Saints 19% chance to win their division, 7.6. Only 10% chance for the Steelers if they have 8.5 wins, right? So that's how much more difficult the road is for the Steelers this season than some other teams, especially all those teams in the NFC South. That's the division you want to play in right now.
And especially those last 8 games, as I started the show with, is insanity. And we could go back and forth, and frankly, it doesn't matter if the Saints, the Bucs, the Steelers, who's the best team of the 3. But one of them has a lot harder path than the others, and there's no question about that.
Absolutely. A few other teams have some difficult schedules here, so let's look at those.
There are some cool anomalies, yeah.
The bottom 3 are a nice gap below the rest as far as how difficult the schedules are. The Steelers, we talked about, 32. 31 is the New England Patriots, and 30, and it shouldn't be a surprise that most of the teams in that division have pretty rough schedules, except for one in the AFC North. Yeah. Right. So the Browns are the 30th, and then there's a pretty big gap, but then 29 is the Baltimore Ravens. So 3 out of 4 in the AFC North have the toughest schedules in the entire league, with the New England Patriots thrown in there. And and even a gap between 29 and 30 between the Ravens and where the Browns and the Patriots and the Steelers are as far as how difficult those schedules are. But can you talk to me about why the Bengals schedule is the 6th easiest when the rest of the division is so difficult when their schedules should be pretty similar?
There's only 2 reasons that make any sense. Is, first of all, they're 4th in the division. So, for example, they play the Patriots instead of the Jets, Dolphins, Bills. So that's pretty good. But that's only 2 games that matters.
And that's why the Patriots are so difficult, because they're playing a 4th place schedule, but then they get a team that could be a first place team in the Bengals because of how things turned out.
Yeah, right.
Like you were talking about with the Jets.
And then the other thing is, Cincy has a higher win total than the Steelers or Browns. So when the Bengals play the Browns or Steelers, it doesn't hurt them in this metric as bad as the other way around. You know what I mean? But that's the only variables that's different from the rest of the division. And real quick, BP, since we're talking AFC North, I know we got to move on, but the Ravens' first 5 games are kind of like the Steelers' last 8. We know they go to Kansas City to start the season. Best of luck. But then they get a long week and they host Vegas. Good. You better win that game, because then you go to Dallas, you host Buffalo, and then you go to Cincinnati. So the Ravens, who I thought were the best team in the league last year, if they're 2-3, 1-4, hold your water. It gets a little easier,
Don't panic. Would you rather have a tough schedule in the first half or the second half of the season, man?
I don't know. I think there's something to be said about galvanizing yourself and basically playing playoff games every stretch of the way down the stretch, because I don't think any of us think the Steelers are going to be a 14-team win and win team and resting people.
Right.
And so much of it then, at least you could say, like all my Steeler folks, we're talking about these last 8 games, like, yeah, but Lamar might be hurt and Burrow might be out and the Chiefs could be resting people on a short week. Okay, maybe, or TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, Minkah Fitzpatrick, and George Pickens are all hurt too. Who knows? Right.
And then you get things like, okay, if you're playing, for example, the 49ers play both the Bills and the Miami Dolphins on the road this year.
Yeah.
And they're both late in the season, which is good if you're playing Miami, bad if you're playing at Buffalo. So, 50-50, it would be the worst possible thing would be to be playing Buffalo in December, January, and then playing Miami in September. But they're playing them both late. So you get better weather in Miami on that trip, but probably some bad weather in Buffalo. So some of those things with the schedule it's that we already know the teams, but it's when you play them can really change how difficult the game might be on paper.
Another one is Denver. You're like, I always look at, is your favorite team or whatever team, they have to play hot games in September or Denver in September. And the reasoning is very simple, is none of these players are in full 60, 70 snap a game shape. No one played that many snaps in the preseason. So going to Miami, Jacksonville, wherever early in the year, I think is a huge advantage to the home team. But I pulled this nugget out for Denver because the Steelers are going there for their second game. In the last decade, the Broncos are 67% win percentage at home in September. They're 12-6 in September at home over the past decade. While they're home after September, they're only hitting 53% of their games. They're about 500 as opposed to winning 2 out of 3. I mean, Denver at home early is awful, just like Miami at home early is awful. And I don't think it's as bad to go to Buffalo late as it is to go to Miami early, like for your Niner situation.
Yeah, I'll buy that because one team is
just conditioning. Yeah.
And although I think it's probably tough for a team like Miami to go to Buffalo, more so than maybe another team that's maybe not 100%.
As 100%. Yeah. And I looked at this, Miami. I've been giving Miami a hard time that they're built to host playoff games. They're built for speed. They're not built for the AFC East. But their final games going backwards are at Detroit, which isn't that bad, or at the Jets, I'm sorry, at the Browns, San Fran at home, at Houston, Jets, at Green Bay. So they have a lot of bad weather games to finish things out, and they're not built for it.
A Green Bay Packers fan told me that it's better weather in Green Bay, Wisconsin in late November than it is late March. So the weather doesn't really the weather turns pretty late in the season for Green Bay to have like a really bad weather games. So if you can get those games in November, you're still okay versus what it might look like in December, January, especially.
Okay.
That's something to remember.
Playoffs were the ones that always stand out in Green Bay.
Speaking of the Packers, I got one note on the Packers for sure. And let's talk more about the easiest and toughest schedules, but especially the easiest because one team is so far and away ahead of the pack there. Next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by GameTime. And of course, we're talking about football games. There's probably a lot of games you're going to want to buy tickets for right now for the NFL season. And you can get killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee at GameTime. GameTime takes all the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets. And when you buy tickets on GameTime, it's just a couple of taps, get a fantastic deal, and then those tickets are right there on the app. When it comes game time, when you buy tickets 6 months in advance, you don't have to go fishing through your emails trying to figure out where those tickets are. They're right there on the GameTime app for you, whether it's an NFL game, a baseball game, a basketball game, whether it's a concert, comedy show, theater event, whatever it is near you, GameTime takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets. Last-minute deals save up to 60% off buying last-minute sports, concerts, and comedy tickets. Flash deals, zone deals, all-in prices, views from your seat. Take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime and download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So the easiest, actually, I teased the Packers note. I want to drop the Packers note here because they have one pretty rough stretch, which is not great for them. So the 49ers and Packers play at Lambeau on November 24th. And then they have a Thanksgiving game just a few days later. And teams that have played the 49ers the last few years, because the 49ers play a physical brand of ball, teams that play the 49ers get pretty beat up. And usually there's a lot of output in those games physically. Those teams have a terrible record. And in fact, I think 2 years ago, teams that played the 49ers all lost the following week, except for one team, and that team had a bye the following week.
It was the Chiefs or something, I remember. Yeah.
And so that's a tough ask for a team ever to play those short week Thursday games. And I'm still waiting for that second bye week for the NFL. And I'm sure it's going to happen at some point in the next CBA. But that's a tough portion of the season for the Green Bay Packers to play the 49ers, then have a Thanksgiving game late in the season. And so there's those anomalies throughout the year that are tough for teams. You know, the teams that are going overseas, going to London. We got a Brazil game on the schedule this year, which is also the Packers, right? So I don't think the Packers schedule is super easy, but based on win totals, they're kind of middle of the pack. It might play a little bit more difficult for them.
Okay, very interesting. I'm trying not to make it a Niners and Steelers show, but there is some Niners things I want to throw out since you mentioned them as well. You're probably aware, but as it stands right now, and it's amazing they have all the lines already. The Niners are favored in every one of their games this year. They're the only team right now that's favored in every one of their games. And I think you can put bets on week 15 games already. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, they're up there. Those are available at FanDuel. Absolutely. And the 49ers, one of their games is against the Kansas City Chiefs, who they haven't beat in the Mahomes era.
Yeah.
But they get the Chiefs at home, which is, which gives you a couple extra points. And the 49ers, if I'm not mistaken, do have let me pull it up. I believe they have, this is from Computer Cowboy on Twitter. They have the highest betting market, like, so their average, basically the number on this graph that I'm looking at, it's how many points a team would be favored against a league average opponent on a neutral field. The 49ers would be favored a point more than the next closest team, 5.2 points on average. They'd be favored against every team in the NFL. Second would be the Chiefs. Third would be the Ravens. Of those three teams, way ahead of everybody else. And to give you a little clue to the bottom of the list here, I'm going down. So it is the Panthers that are negative 4.8 points against the average team on a neutral field throughout the season.
Okay. Speaking of the Panthers, they're the only team without a primetime game. So, I'm not sure if anybody earned that distinction. I think it's them.
Yeah. Not a team that people are fighting to go see. Niners have the most with 6 primetime games, 2 Thursday nighters.
And I was going to say a couple other nuggets here too. The Jets are the first team in NFL history to have 6 primetime games in their first 11 weeks of the season. Like, remember they had a ton last year? And as soon as Rodgers went down, I'm sure all the networks lost their mind. And they could probably play. They can also play 3 rookie quarterbacks in their first 5 games: Drake May, Bo Nix, and JJ McCarthy. So the Jets have a really interesting schedule, and we're going to see a lot of them on primetime. I want to go back to your Niners.
Okay.
So they're favored in every game, which is crazy, but their schedule isn't easy. It's not like some of the ones we'll talk about that are really rough. But I don't know if you know this. This is kind of crazy. So they're the only team that has to play 4 games against a team coming off their bye. So the Bills, Chiefs, Cowboys, and Seahawks will all be rested an extra week to play the Niners, where the Niners won't be rested for any of those games.
Right.
So that's 4 times. That's by far the most. So the Colts have a 3, but one of them, they're also coming off a bye. So really, a lot of them have 2 where you're at a major rest disadvantage from a bye, but the Niners have 4.
What's funny is, one of those games, the Niners have a mini bye. So they'll be coming up a Thursday game. So they'll have a few extra. It's the Niners Chiefs game, but the Chiefs have a full bye. So they don't even have an advantage there. It's the Niners. So this is the second year in a row. The 49ers, that same thing happened last year. 4 teams coming off byes playing against the Niners. They were 2-2 in those games last year.
Awful tough, man.
Yeah, it's difficult. And the 49ers are minus 16 in days of rest versus their schedule.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen that yet.
And I don't know how that ranks. I assume it's one of the worst in the league because of the bye thing. But they're minus 16 days of rest versus their opponents, and much more difficult second half of the schedule for the Niners than the first half of the schedule.
Interesting. So I got a bunch of other nuggets. I don't know what all you have here too.
I just want to talk about the easiest schedules really quick and how much easier it looks like. We already talked about the NFC South a little bit, but the Falcons are far and away ahead by themselves at the top. Looking at this graph from Sharp Football Analysis, based on those Vegas forecasted win totals for how easy their schedule is. And when I referenced earlier on the percentages, chances of winning divisions and stuff, they have the third best, I believe, chance to win their division with only 9.8 wins, 53% chance of winning their division. So that is the Falcons schedule, which is among probably the easiest in the league, partially because of the division they play in. But there's not playing a difficult schedule, and they didn't win their division last year either. So they're not playing a first place schedule.
The one little thing about theirs is it doesn't start easy, but because they host the Steelers, they're favored in that game. Then they got to go to Philly, and then they host the Chiefs, Saints, and Bucks. So those first 5 are at least, even type teams, and at Philly and Kansas City look like probable losses. But then after that, man, it's like smooth sailing. So get Cousins acclimated early and hopefully stay healthy.
And the next few for the top 5 easiest schedules in the league, big gap after the Falcons. Then there's the Chargers that are the second easiest schedule, and a little bit of a gap. Then it goes Bears, Jets, Saints. But really from like
Bears have a nice setup.
Most of these teams, I don't think there's a huge gap really from like, 7 through 29. It's pretty those are pretty similar schedules, plus or minus a little bit where how difficult they are as far as the Vegas forecasted win totals go. But really the outliers are the bottom 3, Browns, Patriots, and Steelers most difficult, and the top few teams, Falcons especially, Chargers too, and then the Bears, the Jets have a pretty easy run. The Jets, because they're playing that non-Aaron Rodgers schedule, but they have Aaron Rodgers back. That's the big for them.
Like the Jets and Bengals kind of screw things up when you look at last year's win percentage as opposed to this year's Vegas win totals. They look like they're a lot harder to play now than they would have been last year.
Right. Yeah. You drop a Hall of Fame quarterback onto a team, it's going to change how good that team is.
And of course, Burrow.
Will be. And Burrow, Hall of Fame path maybe for Burrow. I don't know. He's got that wrist injury now too. Like Burrow's career is kind of on the precipice right now.
Oh, it's make or break time. You got to stay healthy and be the guy, right?
Absolutely. More notes on the.
I got a lot of little things here I want to talk about.
Too. Schedule. We'll get to that next. Of course, we just talked about betting lines. You can find over/under win totals at FanDuel. You can find weekly lines at FanDuel to bet on your favorite team, Super Bowl odds, offensive, defensive rookies of the year, and so much more at America's #1 sports book. And of course, it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL playoffs. And FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big W of your own, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, NFL futures, and tons more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get in on all of the action. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, what else jumps out to you from the 2024 schedule, man?
Well, the Christmas thing, I think, is really interesting, too, because Christmas is on a Wednesday this year. But the NFL is not going to avoid that in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
And it's not a shock to me or anyone. Those are Netflix games. And I think they're the first ever games on Netflix. And there's a pretty good chance Taylor Swift is going to be here in Pittsburgh on Christmas with her boyfriend, which spikes Netflix ratings 1,000%.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, it's amazing what that just does. Just, glimpses of her in the box. So, whatever. But just from a football perspective, what's really cool is there's 2, I don't know if it's cool, it's hard. There's 2 Christmas games. Is Kansas City's here, and Houston is, they're playing Baltimore. I forget where that's at. I'm looking right now. It's at Houston. Baltimore's at Houston. So those 4 teams have to play Wednesday. Now, the league is not going to have them play Sunday, then Wednesday. So they're all going to play Saturday before that. So the Steelers go to Baltimore on a short week for a Saturday game so they can host the Chiefs on Wednesday on Christmas, where the Chiefs are kind of doing the same thing. They host Houston on a short week so that they can travel to Pittsburgh on Wednesday. See what I'm saying? Like, it screws it up for 2 weeks to have these Wednesday games.
Yeah. And I find it interesting, Matt, that you think that Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce are still going to be together.
That's a pressing point.
She's got albums to write. I think she needs a high profile breakup
Yeah,
right?
we'll go along. I think she's doing all right for herself. But yeah, right.
I wonder if that's on FanDuel. That's my projection for the 2024 season. Taylor Swift, Travis
sales are low, yeah,
not together anymore by Christmas.
She'll write songs about him blowing out his knee and or something mean. Yeah. I guess some more nuggets. So I talked about how your Niners have this really difficult thing with playing teams coming off a bye. Amazingly, there's a dozen teams that never play an opponent coming off a bye. I mean, Bills, Patriots, Jets, Ravens, Bengals, Jags, Titans, Eagles, Vikings, Packers, Panthers, Falcons. Never have to play a team coming off a bye. Like, that's a great advantage. That's a whole dozen teams.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to the schedule makers, because I took a peek into the process one time, a long time ago, about how they make the schedules. And it's pretty wild, and how many different iterations of the schedule they come up with, and the algorithms and everything they use to try to figure all this out and get it to work. And, I'm sure a game like, the Chiefs by Netflix was like, here's $100 billion gazillion dollars. We want a Chiefs game on Christmas, right? Like 100%. This has to happen. So you have to plug in the things that you want, that you have to happen. You have to figure out logistics with things like London games and Brazil games and some of those things. And then you let the rest happen. And if rest and bye week stuff is wonky, that's the last thing that anybody's worried about. The rest of it works, so we don't care.
We'd love to give you a home game week 8, but Springsteen's in your building that day. You can't do it.
Sorry.
You know what I mean? Or baseball playoffs or things like that. And, another one I saw here is, once again, Jacksonville's doing back-to-back games overseas. So that's cool for them. They get to stay there once again, making that their home. So that's, another little nugget I dug up. And then the Bills are another team that has a really hard schedule. It's not quite the Steelers, AFC North level, but it's really hard. But how about this? This is something I look at a lot. 3 straight road games is a death sentence. Like in the NFL, I'm almost certain teams that are on their 3rd straight road game win like 17% of their games. And the Bills are one of those teams. So do the Bears, Browns, Vikings, where they have 3 straight road games. And the Bills are also one of 2 teams, including the Bucs, that face the 4 teams that played on championship weekend: Chiefs, Lions, Ravens, Niners. So they played the 4 best teams in the league, and they're one of 4 teams with 3 straight road games. That's brutal, man.
That is brutal. One of the other things that happens, and I know the 49ers request from the league, if they're going to make East Coast trips, to have them together. And then they end up staying, West Virginia, there's a place where they stay, and the whole team stays, and then they'll play the second week and then come back. So they just kind of have a little mini training camp away from Santa Clara.
Make it a bonding thing. And right.
Yeah. And so West Virginia is one of the spots they do that. Youngstown, Ohio, 49ers ownership groups had a long-time connection with Youngstown.
The Bartolos are from Youngstown.
Yeah, right. And so those are things that happen. This year they weren't able to get that, and so they might be a little bit upset to be traveling separately in just a few weeks apart, going to Buffalo, then going back to Miami, and going back and forth. So those East Coast West Coast trips, the West Coast teams, especially Seattle, LA, San Francisco, those teams always log the most miles just because they have the furthest to go each time they go travel.
We are so good together, because that was my last nugget. I'm sitting here looking at total mileage, and I just want to kind of mention the ones at the top and the bottom. And the Niners are near the top. They're a little under 25,000 miles traveled, but the ones above 25,000 are the Patriots. They got a tough go of it, man. Seattle, Miami,
London,
and the Chargers.
Aren't they going to London as well?
Probably. Yeah, that makes some sense.
Let me see here. New England, I think, is Jacksonville, New England, in London. Yeah. So the back-to-back London games for Jacksonville is
Patriots.
One's a home game, one's not. It is a
Chicago, then New England.
Yeah, Chicago. It's a Chicago home game and then a Jacksonville home game in London against New England. Yeah, so New England's got that trip, which adds to it. Obviously.
Adds to it. I mean, they have a tough schedule to begin with, and let alone all the mileage. So Chargers, Dolphins, Seahawks, Patriots are all over 25,000 miles flown, traveled, whatever. Where Washington's just over 10,000. Cincinnati's just over 10,000. The Colts are a little over 11. The Steelers and Falcons are a little over 12. I mean, like, they're drastic differences.
Right. Yeah. So some of those teams in the Eastern conferences, or the Eastern divisions, like Washington, the farthest trip they might have to make every year is just going to Dallas one time.
Yeah, right.
If you don't have a full West Coast trip.
So, I mean, like one of my best buds that I do the Steelers show with, his name's Dale Lawley, and he travels with the team and he's covered the team forever. They always look at it. He's like, I only have 3 flights this year. I'm going to Atlanta, I'm going to Denver, and I'm going to Vegas. Everyone else I'm going to drive. Great.
Yeah. So if you're Seattle, there's no driving trips. They're all flying trips. Every road game. Yeah. Crazy.
I mean, even for the team. But I mean, he's talking about the team of like the Steelers will fly to Indy, but he'll drive there because it's 6 hours. The only place the Steelers arrive is Cleveland because it's 2 hours away.
All right. After looking at the schedule,
crazy.
Do you have any thoughts? Who's going to win it? Who's going to win it all, Matt?
Steelers probably. Roll through those last 8 games.
What's funny is halfway through the season, we'll be like, oh, man, that schedule doesn't look so bad now. Someone will tear their ACL and there'll be like, something weird will happen with a couple teams and someone will fall off a cliff. And all of a sudden, Russell Wilson or Justin Fields is playing at a phenomenal level. And you're like, or you're running the ball so well. It's like, oh, man, Steelers, thank God we've got all these bad weather games because we're built for it. And we're going to win all those games in the second half of the year. So who knows what it's going to be.
Typical Steelers stuff would be like being 2-5 against the easy schedule and then being 5-2 versus the tough stuff,
Yeah. And, they're going to be a game over 500 and probably sneak into the playoffs as a wild card.
Interesting stuff, though. I always play down the schedule release day and show and week, but I like after it happens and some of the analytic dorks kind of dig in and find some of these anomalies,
Yeah. And, I've really come to enjoy the overseas games and, I'm excited for the Brazil games. I like seeing different areas host games and see how they treat it and see how the NFL game is expanded upon. It's not always great for travel for teams like that, but from a fan perspective, I kind of like it. How into the games they got in Germany. That was really fun to watch. So, I like the NFL expanding in that regard. I don't know if they'll ever be able to have a franchise there, but essentially the Jaguars is about as close as it gets right now, and we'll see if that starts to become a real advantage for them because they get an away game in kind of a home environment. There's got to be a lot more Jacksonville Jaguars fans in London now than Bears fans, right?
Oh, I would think so. Yeah, I mean that's becoming a home to them.
Yeah.
Last thing I got scheduling, and we'll move on. Obviously, is you brought this up the other day, yesterday, I guess it was, and I've been thinking about it a lot. I mean, Warren Sharp put out that, the number of 1:00 games throughout the season. Like there's 10 1:00 Eastern games on Sunday. There's a couple times there's 9. There's a bunch of times there's 8. Those games are going to be Tuesdays and Wednesdays before you know it. I have no doubt in my mind. It's going to be like that Christmas thing. They make you play someone on Saturday and then you go play Wednesday. That stuff is coming. You nailed that.
Yeah, we talk about travel miles, but we don't talk about body clocks too, which is a big one for primetime games and early games. And I think one of the things that benefits the 49ers is they have one of the lowest I can remember. There's only 2 West Coast 10 a.m. games. So East Coast 1 p.m. games for the 49ers, which is, it's pretty, that's an early start. I think 10 a.m. to play a football game for your body clock based on when most football games are played. They only have 2 of those this year.
Wow. That kind of stuff is interesting. Yeah. And we'll find out more of the stuff too coming out. I mean, some people will really dig into this stuff.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Let us know what you think. What does your team schedule look like at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL? Drop a comment on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed while you're there. And of course, you can find us everywhere you listen to your podcast. Matt and I back tomorrow right here, Peacock and Williamson.